Hello again, and thanks for stopping by today. I am going to be talking about the nested virtualization that Windows has available. So I pulled up some articles, but I also have it running in the background here on a Hyper-V and virtual machine, so I'll briefly show that also. So what is nested virtualization, and why would I want to use it, or why might you want to use it? If you've never used it before, I will include links to the articles that I'm going to take a look at here, and you can go ahead and read more about them. But here is an article about nested virtualization and what is it. So basically, it's a feature that allows you to run Hyper-V inside of a Hyper-V virtual machine. Like for software development or testing or a lot of other reasons, you may not want to install certain pieces of software on your main machine. That's like the one I'm using right here. And instead, you may want to install it inside of a virtual machine so that you don't mess up your settings, or you just want to keep things segmented or clean. And that's what I do in a lot of cases for making various YouTube videos. I'll run different virtual machines with different software on them, just depending on what I'm doing. Or when I'm building and testing software, I can also use virtual machines. In order to do that, you do have to meet some requirements. And let's take a look here. So over the years, the hardware has improved and the use cases for nested virtualization have expanded. For example, they give these running applications or emulators in a nested VM, testing software releases on VMs, reducing deployment times for training environments, and using Hyper-V isolation for containers. And so modern processors include hardware features that make virtualization faster and more secure. Hyper-V relies on these processor extensions to run virtual machines. For example, the Intel VTX and the AMD V. Nested virtualization makes this hardware available to guest virtual machines, and that's what I have running on this machine. Here I've pulled up my task manager, and if you look down here where it says virtualization enabled, you have to go into your BIOS settings and enable it there if you haven't done that before. That's one of the steps that you need to take. There's also some settings or software that needs to be installed on the host machine, which is the main machine that has Hyper-V running on it. And I've already set those things up, but that's one way to tell if you have virtualization enabled on your Windows machine. So let's go back to the article here. The following diagram shows Hyper-V without nesting, and the Hyper-V hypervisor takes full control of the hardware virtualization capabilities, that's the orange arrow, and doesn't expose them to the guest operating system, that's the VM. And if we scroll down a little, here we can see, in contrast, the following diagram shows Hyper-V with nested virtualization enabled. In this case, the Hyper-V on the host exposes the hardware virtualization to its virtual machines. With nesting enabled, a guest virtual machine can install its own hypervisor and run its own guest VMs. And that's what I'm talking about, what I've done in some cases. And also, for example, if you want Docker installed just for experimenting with different things, you can go ahead and install it here in this upper right area of this diagram. That would be your guest virtual machine. And so within there, once you have it configured and set up as a nested virtualized machine, you can run Docker and also WSL2 and the Windows subsystem for Linux inside of your virtual machine, which is actually really powerful. Again, if you don't want to install a whole bunch of different things on your main machine, you can create different VMs. And I have an article here with a picture, so it shows this person in their Hyper-V manager, which is just free software that comes with Windows. They have all these different virtual machines, so you could have a different virtual machine for different things that you want to test out. Maybe all kinds of different AI tools. Each one could have its own, so you can basically get your operating system installed and then start it up, do whatever you want inside of there, and then shut it down, and then open up your other VM and use it in whatever way you need to. But also, as I'm suggesting in this video, you can further enable a virtualized operating system such as Docker or Docker Desktop for Windows inside of one of these VMs. And that's really powerful. And it's all just built into Windows. Again, you have to have some of the hardware features available on your CPU and your computer system. I'm back on this diagram again. And so in this case, Hyper-V exposes the hardware virtualization extensions to its virtual machines. And that's where you get to tell your virtual machine that it can go ahead and use this hardware virtualization and nested virtualization inside of itself. Let's see what else it says here. When Hyper-V is running inside a virtual machine, the virtual machine must be turned off to adjust its memory, meaning that even if dynamic memory is enabled, the amount of memory doesn't fluctuate. Simply enabling nested virtualization has no effect on dynamic memory or runtime memory resize. It goes on to say here, Hyper-V VMs on Hyper-V VMs. Running Hyper-V VMs nested on Hyper-V VMs is great for test labs and evaluation environments, and that's what I use it for, especially where configurations can be easily modified and saved states can be used to revert to specific configurations. So that's just more options that you have built into the Hyper-V and into your test environments. They do say here, production environments running Hyper-V VMs running on Hyper-V VMs are supported. However, it's recommended to make sure that your services and applications are also supported. If you use nested Hyper-V VMs in production, it is recommended to fully evaluate whether the services or applications provide the expected behavior. They have another article here, how to set up nested virtualizations for Azure, VM, and VHD. Here's another interesting thing, running WSL2 in a Hyper-V VM running nested on Hyper-V. Windows Subsystem for Linux, WSL, is a feature of the Windows operating system that enables you to run a Linux file system along with Linux commands or command line tools and GUI apps directly on Windows. And this is important. Running WSL2 in a Hyper-V VM running nested on a Hyper-V is supported. In fact, I have it running here, which I'm going to show on my VM machine here in just a moment. This is a really good article that lays out what is nested virtualization. And here we have an article about running Hyper-V in a virtual machine with nested virtualization. And they get into the prerequisites. First of all, they say you have to have an Intel processor with VTX and EPT technology. The Hyper-V host must be either Windows Server 2016 or later or Windows 10 or later. I'm using Windows 11 in my configuration and VM configuration version 8 or higher. And then they talk about the AMD Ryzen processor or later. The Hyper-V host must be either Windows Server 2022 or later or Windows 11 or later. And this is an important command here. This is how I enable it on my machine. While the virtual machine is off or in the off state, you have to run the following command on the physical Hyper-V host, like the one that I'm using right here, to enable nested virtualization for the virtual machine. And so here's the command. It's set VM processor -VM name, and then you give it the actual name of whatever you called your VM. I believe mine's called sample 2 or 3. And then the minus expose virtualization extensions and set it to true. Just open that up in a PowerShell command and run it. It doesn't take long at all. And then that's basically what's telling the two to work together. And then number 3, you start up your virtual machine, which again, I'll show that momentarily. Then you can install Hyper-V within the virtual machine, just like you would for the physical server. And if you haven't done that before, there is an article here about installing Hyper-V on your host machine, which I do have it installed on this machine. And of course, if you need to disable the nested virtualization, it's just the opposite of the other command. You set this parameter to false. I'm not going to get into this aspect in this video about networking options, but they do talk about MAC address spoofing and network address translation. Let me see, I think I had one other article here just talking about Hyper-V technology in case you haven't used it before. I'll just go through this very initial statement here. Hyper-V is Microsoft's hardware virtualization product. It lets you create and run a software version of a computer called a virtual machine. Each virtual machine acts like a complete computer running an operating system. When you need computing resources, virtual machines give you more flexibility to help save time and money, and are a more efficient way to use the hardware on your machine than running just one operating system. This has always been good for trying out new concepts, working on different AI projects, installing applications that you don't want on your main machine. And when you're done with it, you can just erase the virtual machine from Hyper-V if you don't need it anymore, and then you can reuse the space, the hard drive space and memory for something else. Hyper-V runs each virtual machine in its own isolated space. Can run more than one virtual machine at the same time on the same hardware. Let's go ahead and take a look now at my configuration briefly. Here we have the Hyper-V manager. I have one machine called Speedy3 that has been configured and it is up and running. And I can go ahead and show that now. And here is the sample VM on Speedy3. So it is my nested virtual machine inside of my host machine. And I actually have Docker running on here. And also, let's look at a couple other things that got installed. This WSL and the WSL settings. So I can go ahead and click on that. And it opens up an instance here for you to run your commands. Right now in my Docker running inside of this VM, it does not have anything installed. I wanted to keep it simple for this video. We can also look at the task manager. And as I showed on the main host machine, if I go to performance, we can see right here, this is virtualization is enabled. So you have to make sure that's enabled, otherwise it will not work. And if we look at the processes, we can see here the Docker and its desktop is running here inside of this virtual machine. And that does unlock a lot of other capabilities with all the open source projects and Docker Compose files and Docker technology. You can experiment with all of that here inside of a virtual machine. I just find this really interesting and a really powerful way to utilize the hardware on your Windows machine. If you haven't done it before, you should give it a try. Also within this virtual machine, I pulled up the Windows features. So I went into the control panel and I clicked on turn Windows features on or off. And I wanted to quickly show this screen here to show you what I have installed here. I have containers, that's been installed. Hyper-V and the Hyper-V management tools have been installed. The Hyper-V platform, Hyper-V hypervisor, and Hyper-V services. All that is running inside of this virtual machine. And what else? Here we have the virtual machine platform, the Windows hypervisor platform, Windows PowerShell 2.0, and the Windows system for Linux. So those are all the different things that I have installed on this machine as it's configured right now. Well, I hope this video is helpful, and if you haven't tried out this kind of technology before, if you have a Windows machine that meets the requirements, you should give it a try. I think it's really cool that we have technology like this available to us as we experiment and try out new software and applications, and especially all the new AI things going on. I appreciate you stopping by today. Have a great day. If you like this channel, please like and subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified when I post new content.